Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and remembering for all time. Every episode we discuss a different piece of film history to decide if it should make its way into our movie vault. Filled with questions, trivia and crazy challenges, it's the perfect way to deep dive into a myriad of movies. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a glimpse of what to expect in today's episode.
Your final score was 7, and losing to 45.
Wow. Oh my God. Is that like one of the highest scores ever? Because usually it is just a 1-point system.
Yes, that is probably the highest score on record.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? I am the father. Great Scott! I'll be back. Here's Johnny. Oh, hi, Mark.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman.
It's not the boss. It's a silly movie. I'll miss you, my pretty.
To infinity and beyond.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that asks which are the movies well worth watching and which deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm joined by my co-host, someone who is as theatrical as a radio, but as grumpy as a vacuum cleaner. It's Craig MacDonald. Hello, Craig.
Yep.
You just can't deny it. Come on, you gotta admit, you watched this film and thought, that is me. That expression.
To be honest, I probably related a little bit more to like the air conditioning unit at the beginning, purely because it just blew itself up.
Well, yeah, that's an entire discussion in itself. So we'll get to it. We'll get there. So yeah, Craig, this is a special episode. Not so much actually like this specific one in terms of like number or anything like that, but it is the moment in which we're announcing that we are approaching our 100th episode. How crazy is that?
Yeah, I know. I'm surprised I haven't killed you by this point.
I was going to joke that I was just like, oh, Craig, we've done like almost 100 episodes together. How have you not killed me? But then it's like, well, you knew me for like 10, 15, 20 years or whatever before doing the podcast as well.
Yeah, but that was like not really that much in a working capacity, right? Everything we tried to work on together sort of failed one way or another. So I think the degree to which the prolonged working together is probably worth commenting on.
True, yeah. So that 100th episode will be quite the milestone just for like the test of our friendship. So congratulations. But yeah.
Or commiserations, depending on the perspective.
It'll just be the 100th episode, which would be my funeral. So yeah, we're getting ready now for this 100th episode, and we thought it'd be a great time to kind of have a countdown to 100 by having the odd special episode in which we go out of our usual run of episodes in which kind of each film links to the next one to discuss some films that have been mentioned before or have been on our radar, and we just have to discuss these just because they've been brought up so many times or they've been mentioned in challenges, etc. in the past. And today's film is one of those films, maybe not so much for the audience, they would understand the context of this one, but definitely for me and Craig, it's been one that we've discussed for a long time. So to add a little bit of context, before when we were celebrating having done the podcast for around a year, I think, then we did a audio commentary for another very dark 80s film, Return to Oz, which was kind of a throwback to original plan of mine and Craig's, which was to do more kind of commentaries and sort of like bonus content. And a film which we also recorded a commentary for was The Brave Little Toaster from 1987.
Or, as the version that we watched called it, Zieli Meli Toaster.
Yes, yeah, because we could only find like a Polish copy of the DVD, which I should have brought in the room with me, actually. I'm sure that'll come up. Basically, we did a commentary on that film, as Craig will often remind me with many things that never see the light of day, which we sometimes record or have done. It is something that's not seen the light of day, as we're hoping to kind of use it as a sort of bit of bonus content, but then time passed and, you know, it no longer seemed relevant. But we've always wanted to go back to that film, and we even tried to sneak it into our run of films. And this is the only time we've done this, I think, Craig, isn't it, in which we like sort of...
Well, we've actively conspired that the film that we chose was actually just the same film. Yes, this is the only time we've done this. And fittingly so, we try to do it because of the guest that we have today as well.
Exactly. So, there was good reason for it. But yeah, there was, when we give our suggestions, every time me and Craig always have a different film. I think 99% of the time we don't know what the other person's film is. But in that circumstance, we did, because we were like, we want this film. And then we got given A Town Called Panic, and we still had a wonderful time talking about that crazy, mad film. Anyway, so yeah, this film is something that we've been thinking about for a long time, because it's so dark, it's so crazy. It fits with the vibe of things like we've discussed, like Return to Oz, but also many other crazy like 80s, 90s films that we've discussed on this podcast. Also, I thought it was perfect timing, as we've mentioned, because of that certain guest who was joining us a year ago. They are now returning once again. So we're happy to welcome back Dr. Sam Summers, lecturer in animation and co-host over on Disniversity. Hello, Sam.
Hello, guys. It is nice to be back. Yeah, it's been, I'll be honest, a hell of a year for me. I have, like I was going to say protagonist in The Brave Little Toaster, but he's almost the antagonist in a way. Like the master in The Brave Little Toaster, I have, packed up and moved across the country from Newcastle to London. So I'm in a different room, as you'll notice, with a slightly different backdrop. Not very snazzy at the minute. So what you're looking at, guys, is a big empty white shelf, which is obscuring the shelf with all the DVDs in, because this is a shelf that we're trying to get rid of. So I do have The Brave Little Toaster on DVD. It is an American DVD, but I can't get it to show you because I already got it out and put it back behind that shelf once, and I'm not doing it again. And crucially, it is... Does anyone remember when DVDs used to be like... They weren't in widescreen, no matter what ratio the film was in? When DVDs very first started, a lot of them were just in 1.33 ratio because that's what TVs were. So they were cropped on the sides. And my DVD of The Brave Little Toaster is that. So if either of you guys want to talk about anything that happened on the far left or the far right of the frame in this movie, I'm not going to be able to contribute, unfortunately, because I'll have missed it.
It's fine, we're not a political podcast.
I was going to say, I'm glad you added in this movie to that.
Yeah, let's not talk about any far left or far right political views.
Please welcome to the stage Donald Trump.
or anything that happens on the periphery of The Brave Little Toaster. Who knows what they were? I saw what was in the centre, and a lot of it was already horrific enough. Who knows what's on the periphery?
We shall talk all about The Brave Little Toaster very soon, but essentially, yes. Sam, we thought you were perfect to discuss this film because you're deep in the world of crazy animation. Obviously, on Disniversity, as we will talk about later, you have kind of discussed this era of animation in a way. I think last time you were on, you were just coming off of the Dark Age as well. So we were talking about things like Oliver and Company. So we're taking you back to the Dark Age. I don't know if it's begrudgingly or happily or somewhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to journey back to that era of animation. A lot of people call the kind of 70s and 80s the dark age of American animation, and that's something that we adopted on our podcast specifically to talk about Disney's films during that era, because not that they were all bad, because many of them are actually hidden gems, but they are darker thematically and kind of have a darker visual palette for the most part, as well as being arguably a bit of a artistic and commercial low point for the studio. And elsewhere in the 80s, especially in animation, that was kind of the theme. Like, there were a lot of quite dark movies, again, both visually and in terms of subject matter. And it really, I think, can be attributed to Disney's main competitor during that time, which was Don Bluth, who was a former Disney animator, and his first film was The Secret of Nim. Have you guys seen The Secret of Nim? That's a real piece of work about mice who get experimented on and gain kind of supernatural intelligence and abilities. But it is one of these movies about animal experimentation. It's in a similar space to Watership Down and The Plague Dogs, two British films from the previous decade.
Oh, The Plague Dogs. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
So that's kind of our way into the 1980s, and then like Secret of Nim really kicks off the decade in America, and it wasn't a huge hit, but I think it kind of set the tone, because Bluth's next couple of films, American Tail and The Land Before Time, and to a lesser extent All Dogs Go to Heaven, were massive hits, and they were all extremely bleak as well. And then you've got things like The Last Unicorn and a lot of what Ralph Bakshi was doing around then as well. And The Brave Little Toaster is actually visually one of the brighter of those movies, but thematically, in terms of some of the imagery, is very dark in its own way, and like Don Bluth's films, has a strange relationship with the Disney studio as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
They're the 5 spunkiest little characters you've ever met.
It's a possibility.
For years they've been waiting
Can you see?
Is it him?
and waiting
He loved us.
That's right.
for their master to come home.
Master! Blanky!
We've been dumped, abandoned.
We're not gonna give up hope.
But now their waiting is over.
We're going out to find him.
What?
We're gonna go out and find the master.
Join a brave little toaster and his unusual pals on a magical journey
I'm ready.
through a world of mystery,
Light! I see light!
fantasy, laughter, and adventure. It's an exciting, strange, and fantastic voyage where you'll see scary places,
Hey, fellas, look!
a whole lot of little creatures,
Get out of here.
a few odd contraptions,
But I can't open her 11 shaver.
and some devices that are simply
Remarkable.
They're 5 plucky appliances determined to find their master no matter what.
Yeah, no matter what.
Join an inquisitive radio,
Well, what does that mean?
a bright little lamp,
I'm glad we don't have to do this every day.
a snuggly blanket, a crotchety old vacuum cleaner,
You're telling me.
and a brave little toaster.
Time to go.
In a heartwarming story for the entire family. Plug into the adventure of The Brave Little Toaster.
We look forward to deep diving into Brave Little Toaster anyway today, and talking all about that movie with you, Sam. But first of all, let's get some information about that movie, who was involved in the production of it, and give people a general summary of the story. And of course, later on, we'll have our usual question of whether this deserves the honor of a place in our movie vault, our vault that encapsulates memorable movies for all time. So the story on this one, usually I pull these from a few different sources, or I look at like good summaries, etc. This one, I was like, I quite like this one. I'm just going to take this one as it is. So I'll credit this person. So thank you, Jonah Falcon from IMDb. A group of dated appliances that find themselves stranded in a summer home that their family had just sold decide to, a la The Incredible Journey, seek their young 8-year-old master. Children's film, which on the surface is a frivolous fantasy, but with a dark subtext of abandonment, adolescence, and loneliness. So I thought that kind of like summed things up quite well in terms of like the genres, etc.
Yeah, there's just one error with the summary. They haven't just sold the home, they've put it up for sale.
Yeah, well, I'll considering
Because typically you don't put a for sale sign in front of a property you've just sold.
No. But considering there was another summary that said when a young boy and his family don't come home one year to their holiday home, the household appliances get nervous. And I was just like, but we'll get to that. I'm like, I don't think that was quite what happened, but whatever. We're getting bogged down in semantics. So this film was directed by Jerry Reese, and then written also by Jerry Reese, Joe Ranft, with credit also to Brian McEntee and Thomas M. Dish, who wrote the original novel. The music is by David Newman, editing by Donald W. Ernst, and art direction by Brian McEntee. The cast includes John Lovitz as Radio, Timothy Stack as Lampy, Timothy E. Day as Blanky, Thurl Ravenscroft as Kirby, awesome name, Deanna Oliver as Toaster, Phil Hartman as Air Conditioner, Wayne Katz as The Master, and Joe Ranft as Elmo St. Peters and Evil Clown, which I just had to include there because I was like, this just sums up like how crazy this film is that I'm listing characters who are being voiced, which are toasters and lamps, and then there's Evil Clown, of course. Yeah, that is The Brave Little Toaster. As we've already alluded to, this was a film that came out during that kind of like dark period for animation and during the 1980s. And Sam, I guess you were talking there as well about like the theme you also had about like, you know, films having connections to Disney, etc. So this is one that kind of like was distributed through Disney. I think it said that Disney did the titles on it, but also there's a lot of like Pixar guys who were involved in this film who have like credits, etc. as well. So a lot of people have said that things that happen here are kind of like echoed into like Toy Story and that kind of stuff. And when you look at that crew, which I was saying about, you know, Jerry Reese, etc., you can see their other credits are like Disneyland rides and directors of like, you know, like shorts and like little like TV projects and stuff like that. So it does seem to be within that era in which a lot of people were like coming up in the animation studios, and this was kind of like a random project in some ways, because it's, you know, the film studio, which, you know, I don't know if I've ever recognized from anywhere, which is Hyperion Pictures and the Kushner Lock Company. Would you say that's an accurate summary, Sam, in terms of like the you know the Pixar element of it and the kind of like what it kind of represents in terms of the era it was out, as you previously said?
Yeah, it's kind of a weirdly low-key important movie in the history of animation. It was almost an incredibly important movie in the history of animation. It was almost a serious milestone, and it all comes down to the story behind its development, which involved heavily John Lasseter, who would go on to not found Pixar, but become a really important figure in Pixar. He was effectively the first animator who worked for Pixar at a time when they were just a computer graphics company, and helped to push them into making films of their own, and ended up directing Toy Story and some of their other hits, and some of their other debacles as well, in terms of Cars 2, and just everything that happened to him in 2016, which... well, you can Google it if you don't remember.
Another theme of this year's podcast is cancelled people here.
Right, yeah. I have to tell my students every year, like, just look it up, John Lasseter, and everyone, each successive generation forgets. That is, okay, we'll not dwell on it. But John Lasseter, a really important guy in the history of American animation, and he really wanted to, he was just an animator at Disney, a low-level animator, and his big idea was to make a movie where the backgrounds were computer generated, which was then a new technology that had only just been starting to be used in live action films like Tron. And the characters, the primary characters, would be hand-drawn animated in the typical Disney style. And he produced a test for this along with Glenn Keane, who would go on to become a really legendary Disney animator and was one of the big artistic figures behind the Disney Renaissance and movies like Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. And he and Glenn Keane made a test based on the children's book Where the Wild Things Are, later a live-action movie by Spike Jonze. And this is really cool. You can watch it online. It's the kid from Where the Wild Things Are running through CGI house, basically. And he took this to the Disney bosses, Ron Miller, Walt Disney's son-in-law, who was the head of the company at that point, and said we should make a feature-length movie with this technique. And Disney just happened to have recently acquired the rights to the novel The Brave Little Toaster. And the idea was, okay, let's make this movie in that style. It feels like it will be really well suited to it. And the Disney bosses, Ron Miller, absolutely hated this idea and almost immediately fired John Lasseter for having the temerity to suggest such a thing and to waste resources in developing it. But they still owned the rights, so the idea was passed off onto Hyperion, which was a independent animation studio that was founded by a few former Disney producers, so a little bit like Don Bluth Studio. Some of those producers were working on The Brave Little Toaster when it was in development, so Disney said, we're not going to do this in the expensive half 3D way. We're going to give it to this small studio, get them to produce it for a very small sum, and then we'll distribute it after the fact. And that's what happened. But like, Disney will be making like 2D movies with CGI backgrounds very soon, like The Great Mouse Detective being the first major example of that technique in a feature film, and then a couple of years later, in like 5 years after The Brave Little Toaster came out, you've got Beauty and the Beast, which has huge scenes, obviously the iconic ballroom scene which was produced in exactly the way that John Lasseter was suggesting that they make The Brave Little Toaster, and that was obviously a huge hit. And The Brave Little Toaster just misses out on being that huge milestone in the history of American animation.
You could see the elements of like build into something, like you said, in terms of maybe not technically, but a lot of the themes and the kind of ideas that, you know, these guys are playing with, but maybe a bit darker, but that is still evident, I think, in some Disney stuff. And as you mentioned before, again, this was kind of like a weird era for animation in general. You know, similar stuff at this time, as you mentioned, like Don Bluth. You got things like, you know, Secret of Nim, but also American Tail, Land Before Time. And then later on, you get things like, you know, Fern Gully, but then from Disney, you got Fox and the Hound. You also got like All Dogs Go to Heaven from another studio. So yeah, there's a lot of like, you know, very random, crazy animations going on. And I think when I think of that era, again, even though I wasn't sort of born in the 80s, obviously I think people born in the 90s were still kind of like watching those films on video, or they would be on television, etc. So I think there was this idea of animation at that time was kind of very centered around like, well, let's bring life to these like characters, whether they're like, you know, dinosaurs or dogs, or, you know, like, let's make them speak, and like, let's look to this world and what's it like down under the sea, and what's it like if we bring appliances to life. So I remember as a kid, you know, again, this is why this is something that's always stuck in my mind, is because I had the VHS. I remember buying it in a shop called Macro, which I don't know is kind of like a Costco for people might know from like in the States, but also now in the UK, and kind of being enchanted by like, what is this on the front cover? And I remember quite funnily thinking that the blanket character was a bar of soap just because of his head. But I always remembered this movie because, much like other kind of animations during that time, even things like Wallace and Gromit or like the Snowman and stuff, it's something about it which is then eerie, it sticks in your mind, like Fox and the Hound and, you know, Basil the Grey Mouse Detective, etc. And there was a few things that I don't think it would, there's stuff that's very scary, and to me I was kind of more creeped out by more the subtle stuff rather than the actual scary stuff. But that's why it's always stuck with me, and that's why, you know, I wanted to sort of revisit it and, you know, talk about it in that sense. So yeah, it's interesting in terms of its position in animation history and how it kind of reflects that era, but like you said, also kind of like led up to then all these famous kind of other animated films and names in the animation industry. Craig, obviously we never released this commentary, so remind me, what was your experiences with this film? Had you seen it before we did our commentary?
So I must have seen this film when I was younger, but I only remember, the only scene that I remember watching is the final scene. So basically it means that I am acutely familiar with the junkyard scene above any other scene in this film. But then it was just sort of like later life where, you know, it gets referenced here or there in different into different videos and different reviews. And I become more aware of other scenes, and obviously we both know what at least my favourite scene to sort of reference to each other every now and then would be. So yeah, I had an okay relationship, but I think I've always enjoyed the film. I've always had like a very good time with the film. God only knows what I would have thought of this film as a kid. It definitely didn't traumatize me, I don't think. Unless it has traumatized me to the point of I never remembered watching any of those scenes. But
well, it's worth noting as well that this also had 2 direct-to-video sequels, again a big thing in, you know, the 90s, etc. So there was,
yeah, those I had no knowledge of whatsoever. I've still to this day not seen, and I don't think you could pay me to watch those films.
Next time on Well Good Movies. No, so yeah, The Brave Little Toaster to the Rescue, and the much more crazily named The Brave Little Toaster,
The Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars. Like, why?
So I think that's the one that I remember the most from when I was a kid. I have not seen The Brave Little Toaster to the Rescue. I definitely did see The Brave Little Toaster, but again, it was kind of half remembered. But the one that sticks out, even though I'm not sure if I saw it in its entirety, but there's a couple of scenes from it really stuck out, was The Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars, which obviously as a kid I didn't think anything of. Obviously I've missed something in The Brave Little Toaster to the Rescue, where this series transitions from something very mundane to a world where people go to Mars willy-nilly. It doesn't seem to be the case, having read the Wikipedia page. Like, there's no news story in the background of the brave little toaster to the rescue where, like, man lands on Mars. But it's... that is the one that I remember, and it's mainly the villain in that who is an evil... or I think misunderstood, but a hearing aid, an antagonistic hearing aid who...
Sorry, what?
Yeah.
Sounds so weird as a sentence.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we're spoiling the Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars on this, but there's a hearing aid who sends... So we're getting ahead of ourselves, really. But the master, who the appliances are obsessed with in this movie, and I want to talk all about that because it's weird. He is now an adult and he has a child. He has a baby.
Oh dear Lord. Okay.
The hearing aid somehow teleports that baby to Mars.
I remember this being on like Disney Channel and stuff. So I had seen. So again, because I owned that VHS, I was like, "What? There's like sequels to Brave Little Toaster." So I've seen both. And I can tell you, like the Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars is the one more worth seeing because it's more memorable. I think Brave Little Toaster to the Rescue, I think when you look at that summary, it's literally like they just find like an old computer or something like that from like the 80s or something. And they're like moving at the same time. And it's just, it's just a kind of like feels like a TV episode or something like that.
I'm sorry, but the Brave Little Toaster to the Rescue is basically the plot of this film.
Yeah. But all I remembered from Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars was like going to Mars, and I remember I from what I've seen,
you would, wouldn't you? Yeah.
I was gonna sarcastically say that, but no, he does it for me.
The mode of transport I meant is like the scenes I remember is that like I think like balloons like go up into like space or something. So there's something about like balloons, and they're like, oh, this is how you go to space. Follow the balloons. I think that's what they're saying. It's like when a child lets go of a balloon, they go to space or something like that. So they follow the balloons to Mars or something. But because the VHS and the covers for that film has like the baby in like this basket that they go up into space in, I kind of like headcanon since, oh, the baby, I remember the baby being there. So did the baby go with them up the balloons? But now you've reminded me that, the baby is teleported. I can't remember the hearing aid thing, but the only thing I remember from that is that there's like a ceiling fan on the bottom of this basket, and that's how they like transport themselves to Mars, is following the balloons, and somehow a ceiling fan is able to fly to Mars somehow. But yeah,
it sounds like we should have done this movie. It sounds like we should have done this instead of the first one.
It's just like how did everything in this film lead to the Brave Little Toaster Goes to Mars? But no, I think there's some very special and memorable moments worth talking about in here, and I think, to me, again, it's like this film is more kind of like the kooky, weird, independent film, and those two films are more like the Disney direct-to-video sequels. To me, they seem more joined with Disney, I think. I'm right in saying, maybe, Sam, whereas Brave Little Toaster was still more of an independent sort of piece of media. Am I right in saying?
Yeah, I mean, they were released on Disney home video and stuff, so yeah, maybe slightly more integrated into the Disney brand by that point, although very much still a Hyperion Pictures production.
Yeah, and I think possibly you can see the sequels on Disney Plus, but not Brave Little Toaster or something strange like that. I don't know, but again,
I don't think any of them are on UK Disney Plus, which is why we had to buy shonky DVDs from varying sources, which is strange. There's been no attempt to keep this movie in the public eye. Maybe it's on American Disney Plus. I feel really compelled to look that up now, but it's definitely not on the British version. Only Brave and Braveheart and The Brave Little Tailor, which is a Mickey Mouse short, a very good Mickey Mouse short.
Come on.
So Sam, so watching it for this podcast then, so you obviously had it on DVD, so I assume that there would have been a watch of it within recent years, but yeah.
I watched it about a year ago, and I can't remember why. Usually there's a reason for it, like something occurs to me, like, oh, I should watch this movie. I guess just that it was a big-ish film in the history of American animation, and I thought I'd better get round to it. I can't remember if there's another good reason, but I did.
Doing like a lecture on like important toasters in cinema or something.
And this, I mean, I do mention it in my classes.
That'd be a short lecture series, would it not? It would just be this and like the toasters in like the Bourne Identity.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously there's the toaster, there's the Windows toaster screensaver, which is a classic animated toaster. Okay, leave that one with me as well.
The Simpsons, when he goes back in time with the toaster.
With the toaster, yeah, very good. I do mention Brave Little Toaster in my lectures, in my History of Pixar lecture, because John Lasseter got fired from Disney, went and joined Pixar. That's kind of the story there. But I watched it a year ago, and I had a look, and I did review it on Letterboxd, and I don't remember doing this. And this kind of sets up my take on the movie, which maybe is slightly different from yours. My review just says, I don't know if I'm proud of this, it just says, should have been called The Whiny Little Bastard and His Awful Mates. And I think my main problem with the movie, watching it as an adult, is just that I don't think, maybe with the exception of the blanket, any of the characters in this are particularly likeable. And for most of the movie, and it never really is properly resolved, they all hate each other. These aren't like a family of friends, like, for example, the toys in Toy Story, who are like, you know, they are a family, like, you can't break them apart. They're going to die in the furnace holding hands together and we're all going to cry. These guys hate each other, and there are moments increasingly where they save each other's lives, but in all the conversations that they have, it's so antagonistic. It's like, why are these people friends? Even the toaster, to start with, is really cruel to the blanket and then has a change of heart. And then when he starts treating the blanket a bit better, the lamp is like, what are you being nice to that blanket for? You should be mean to the blanket like we all are. It's like, the blanket has the personality of a small child. He's like 5 years old or something. Why are you all so cruel to the blanket, just delighting in it? So that's problem one with this movie for me, is I find the characters really unappealing and just kind of nasty, even though there's some good voice actors and stuff and kind of sweet designs. It's so cruel. Which I wonder if... So this is written by Joe Ranft, who were briefly mentioned, but he's the other really big important Pixar name who played a major role in this movie. John Lasseter didn't really contribute to the finished product at all, but Joe Ranft wrote it, and he would go on to be, by the time of Toy Story, the head story guy at Pixar. So one of the most important people at that company, and would continue to be so until he tragically died in, I think, a car accident. And, you know, left a real gulf in that studio, really. And you can see, obviously, a lot of similarities between this and Toy Story, which I'm sure we'll come to touch on as we talk more about it. But the appliances / toys come to life and have a weird parasocial relationship with their owner thing. But there's also the famous stories of the early drafts of Toy Story, which were a lot more cruel. And I don't know exactly how much of that was down to Joe Ranft. Some of it maybe even was mitigated by Joe Ranft. I know Jeffrey Katzenberg, the Disney producer, played a big hand in those early drafts and trying to make them darker and more edgy as well. But basically, like, Buzz and Woody were much more cruel characters in the early drafts of Toy Story, which feels closer to what we've got in the Brave Little Toaster in terms of the temperament of these things.
Yeah, well, that was like as well, because we've talked about that era of animation. But I was going to ask you guys, why do you think, one, I'm sure you've talked about this before, Sam, but why was this a thing during the 80s? That I was speaking to a colleague in work today, and he grew up during the 80s, and he was saying, not specifically about Brave Little Toaster, but I was like, yeah, why was stuff so like dark and edgy, and why were these like weird films being produced? And even though he was saying, oh, that was a great decade for movies and for music and stuff. But then he was like, you can understand why some of the kind of like darker stuff was happening because of like things were happening in the real world, but it was still being communicated to them in different ways. So there was obviously things like, AIDS and like, different wars going on. But a lot of that was like communicated even through television. So he said that he remembered like adverts in which it was showing like what would happen if a nuclear bomb went off, and it's just showing like houses just being obliterated, like little models and stuff like that. And that the fact that that's like just a TV advert, you're like, oh, wow, okay, like that's just, yeah, you're living in a grim world right now, kind of not like now in terms of things are very bad, but your escapism is television and that kind of stuff. And they're like, no, this isn't happening. Whereas, yeah, maybe the 80s, I guess, was kind of more, upfront about that.
Yeah, I mean, this came out the year after When the Wind Blows, the classic British animation about what would happen if an atomic bomb was dropped on England. Spoilers, it doesn't go well. And it came out the year before Akira, which is like one of the big kind of nuclear disaster paranoia movies. So in terms of the animations that were more directly addressing those anxieties of the 1980s, Brave Little Toaster is slap in the middle of two of the biggest ones. Yeah, I don't. Let's not draw too close a line between this and Akira and nuclear destruction. But yeah, there's anxiety in the air. Like death and the possibility of death is maybe something that is more commonly discussed in households and in the lives of children. Because the thing about all of these like public service films, which, you know, there was like, I can't remember what it's called, Duck and Cover, I think it's called. There's like an animated turtle who jumps into his shell to avoid nuclear destruction. A lot of it's platitudes, and it's like, let's tell kids what they can do in order to mitigate the damage of a nuclear bomb, to make them feel better. And it's like, maybe we should just not be talking about the bomb as much. Maybe that will make them feel better, because like, this isn't actually going to help. There's nothing you can do. That's what When the Wind Blows is about. It's a satire of the government guidelines of what to do. It's about an old couple who follow those guidelines to the letter, and it doesn't do anything, and they die horribly. Yeah, the kids, I guess, were aware of the possibility of nuclear annihilation. So there's maybe a line you can draw there. But it is a trend. It feels like just a pushback against prior waves of animation, in the same way that Shrek's Anarchy is a pushback to the like family-friendly classic style of the Disney Renaissance. Maybe this was just a pushback. This era was just a pushback against the likes of, and even things like the Aristocats and Robin Hoods, like these Disney movies of the 1970s, which did good but not great. And you know, that's partly why Don Bluth left the studio in the late 70s, because he thought that they were losing a bit of what made Disney special. And part of what made Walt Disney special is that darkness. If you go back to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or Fantasia, or Bambi, or the film that this most resembles, I think, which is Pinocchio. It's a very Pinocchio-esque movie in its structure and in the density of horrors on display. So maybe it was just a pushback against like a light and fluffy version of commercial American animation, which had been more prevalent in the 70s. Although it wasn't one, you know, unlike Shrek and the kind of anarchic comedies that followed that and found great success, if they were trying to appeal to the public by pushing against what had come before, it didn't really work, because not many of these movies were particularly commercially successful. Apart from American Tail and Land Before Time, none of those darker movies were really smash hits, Brave Little Toaster included.
And even then, I would argue they only do well because they just choose their characters well, right? So they just rely on the idea of, oh, cute little mice, yeah, we can go and enjoy this, or oh, every kid's love learning about dinosaurs these days, let's capitalize on that. Whereas everything else is very much like, you are pitching this wrong, guys.
All right, and in this you get Toaster. That's our cute character, and I'm sure Pixar proper could work wonders with this project in the 2000s or even today. But this is like my number 2 issue with the movie, is that the premise is just absolutely preposterous. The idea that toasters and lamps and radios and hoovers have the kind of sentimental value for a kid that a toy does. It's not impossible. I'm sure there will have been kids who got attached to particular lamps. Blanket makes sense. Toaster? And it's visualized as like he sees himself in the toaster and he like makes funny faces in the toaster. The toaster is deluded if he thinks that equates to he's got a real sentimental attachment to this toaster. That's one of the sad things about this movie, and it's kind of how the novel ends, and it's a big way in which the movie differs from the novel, is that the older master doesn't really care about the toaster and the hoover and the lamp and the radio, as one wouldn't. He's not really bothered, and in this movie they kind of change it so that he does feel the kind of sentimental attachment that they feel for him. And I just think that's a bit silly. Like, Toy Story is perfect. It makes sense. Kids love toys. It was compared in that synopsis you brought up to The Incredible Journey, which is about 2 dogs and a cat trying to get back to their owners. And again, makes perfect sense. Dogs love people, people love dogs, they want to be reunited. The very idea of this boy means a lot to this toaster and this toaster means a lot to this boy, I just cannot get behind. It just doesn't make... Did either of you guys have sentimental attachments to household appliances, like utilitarian objects like this.
Well, I guess what, I never watched it being like, kind of like, oh, I relate so much to this in terms of like being attached to a toaster. But kind of when I look back on watching it as a kid and I watch it now, it does remind me sometimes again of like that imagination you have as a child. And I think there's little tidbits of it, now and again during the movie, and it could communicate that a bit better. But I guess maybe that's why I was like lured to it in the first place, when I was younger. But like, I remember when I was young, I had like a Woody, like sort of action figure and a Buzz one, but I didn't have like, I think I had Mr. Potato Head, but it wasn't like the Toy Story Mr. Potato Head. So I had like a bunch of other toys. And like I had like this red robot, and like there's the robot in Toy Story. So if I was recreating Toy Story, that robot would be that robot, but it wasn't the official Toy Story robot. So it's kind of like, to me, I was thinking of like, when you do substitute things for toys. Like I remember when I was really young, I would even take like little blocks of Lego, and it would just be like, 3 strips of yellow, and I'd be like, this is this character and stuff. And I like look back on it now as an adult, like, how did I like fabricate a character and a personality after from 3 bricks? So yes, that's a big push to say you could do that with a toaster, but I think there is an element of like, you could like have the radio or a vacuum cleaner and see a face in it, that kind of element of like, seeing like, an imaginary world within like the mundane.
To be fair, as a kid, I had a favourite pair of tongs I like to play with.
Yeah, okay, kids are weird. And I'm saying that I can picture our Hoover, the first Hoover that I remember. I can conjure it in my mind. Maybe I messed around with it. I can't picture our toaster. I can't recall an image of any toaster that I've ever owned in my entire life. I can't picture what my toaster looks like now.
To be fair, I guess you do also have the element of like children's, like the play kitchens and like play checkout and like be a shop owner, and there's that kind of thing as well. And when
play toaster, great, I get it. I definitely had little toy bits of bread when I was like little plastic bits of toast. Yeah, okay, 100%, that makes sense. He shouldn't even be using a toaster. Toasters are dangerous. Toasters get hot. You can put your hands in them.
To be fair, I do respect this film for showing the most adult form of use of a toaster in the bath.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. But I think what's interesting as well
Sorry,
is when...
I need to stop the nihilist humour on this show, but I just don't want to.
I guess the origins of this story in some ways as well can speak to like why it's the way it is. And you mentioned earlier, Sam, Warship Down. I think that is another, when I've looked into the history of that and that as like a story and stuff, you're like, why did you tell this story to your children? Why did this guy write this? So when you look at this as something that came from like short stories in like a fantasy and science fiction kind of like magazine with like crazy like illustrations, you think, oh, okay, fair enough. And then you see other like covers of it, which is like, like cutesy little drawings of like the blanket with like little faces and stuff. And you're like, is this kind of like the trying to, like you say, Disneyfy something which was actually originally intended as to be a creepy, weird story? But they're like, just run with it. Like you said, kids love things which are inanimate being brought to life, and we'll just go with it, even though it doesn't quite fit. But it's also crazy to me that the creators of this, not only is it like, oh, is this dark and edgy because that's what people like at the moment? It's like that the creators themselves wanted like, oh, wouldn't this be cool if we had this? And whereas I think now animators would be like, if they have a message behind something or there's a vibe, people can often be like, oh, it's too preachy or it's trying to say this, but there's usually good intention behind it. They're usually trying to say, like, be different or, like embrace others and that kind of stuff. Whereas like, what is this film saying? Like, life is harsh and cruel. And I think when I think to myself of watching it as a kid, I think of like, it's just some crazy adventure and, you're watching the adventure unfold. And like you said, it's the incredible journey. They're going out into the wild. And I remember the songs, especially, and a lot of the visuals. But when I watch it and I actually focus in on the story, especially as the film progresses, and I'm like, they're just putting these characters through the ringer. They're just like, and now they go into water. Now they go into sludge. Now they go into a horror place. Now they go into a horrible modern apartment. Now they go, just constantly barraging these characters with horrific scenario after horrific scenario. And you're just like, what did they do? Like, I know you said, Sam, that they are nice characters, which is also true. But then at the same time, it's just the fact that the creators were like, yeah, keep punishing them. Like they deserve the worst.
I made a joke at the beginning as to what I think this film is about, and it was a joke, but I also do believe that's what this film is. I think this film is very much meant to be that sort of grab at nostalgia and why it is that, like, your memories of the past are always going to be so much nicer than just the reality you live around you, and how hyper consumerist society has become and the ways in which that's made a lot of toxic elements, right? So you've got the guy who's cannibalizing all of these tools and all of these
appliances.
Appliances, thank you. To basically just sell on their parts. You've got the modern appliances wanting to be used so much that they're willing to jeopardize the lives of the current main cast. You have an entire junkyard of cars singing about what it is that they used to have in life and what it is that used to make them feel fulfilled, and now they're effectively worthless, which is why they just sit there and welcome death to be crushed into cubes. Like, it is literally just the ways in which society treats like utility and worth just being relatively horrific in and of itself. I think this film is a fantastic depiction of that. And crucially as well, literally no solution as to how we can solve this. Even, like, with the changes of, we got to have a happy ending, still doesn't actually solve the issues that the characters are faced, apart from just, well, they're with the master now, it's all good. Which, when I just heard about the fact that the novel is just, the master didn't care, it's like, yeah, honestly, yeah, that makes sense. It makes everything fit a lot more. I do agree. I find it a bit weird that this guy is so attached to wanting to use appliances from, like, 15 years ago, it's sort of suggested.
Right, because that's the real world, right? Like, people don't... That's what happens. You may be useful for your utility if you're an appliance, but eventually that's not going to be what provides you with worth anymore. And what we've got here is they're no longer... what we've got in the movie is he's taken them to be used again, and that's what they want, is to be used again. And I don't think that is realistic. It's not what would happen. It's not... Even if you're taking this as, like, a metaphor, it's not, like, particularly common. Like, I think the message should have been, find worth in yourself. My ending for this movie is they find the master, and he, not in a necessarily an overtly cruel way, kind of dismisses them, and he's not interested anymore, and he's got newer appliances. But then the toaster and the gang are like, genuinely, the real master is the friends we made along the way. They find worth in themselves and in each other beyond their utility. We don't need to be used. We don't need to be useful in order to have pride and self-esteem and joy. Like, we can find that among ourselves. That would be a better message, I think, other than this, which is just, like, similar to something like Cinderella. If you just endure enough hardship, eventually the problem will solve itself.
And also, just, like, again, the logic of this film, and that's something I want to discuss, is, the world and logic of this movie. But, story-wise, I think one, even as a kid or whether you're watching now, obviously being told the brave little toaster, you're like, oh, that is the central character. And yes, that is, like, the viewpoint we mainly get through, obviously, like, the dream sequences and a lot of the action. But it's almost like, is the brave little toaster, is the brave element of that pretty much the last bit of the film, like the big sacrifice, which, again, we'll get onto, is very grim and dark. But, ultimately, like, when I'm watching this film, most of the time I'm like, Blanky seems to be more the kind of, like, what would typically be your kind of main character, who is, like you said, is a nicer character for one, but also seems to have, in some ways, more of an attachment to the main character. And even the master himself, he doesn't even, it's like, yes, I think it is funny that he's, like, got this attachment to his toaster, but I don't even feel he's got an attachment to the toaster that much that means that the toaster is central to this. Because I think even when he says, I'm going to go to the cabin and pick up the lamp and the radio and the other appliances or something like that, he might mention the toaster, but the fact that he says the lamp and something is like, so you're not even acknowledging that the toaster is the most important to you. You could have done something like, oh, that toaster never let me down, it was the best toaster I ever had. You could do something goofy like that. But I think where it does work is when the lamp has, like, oh, remember that time when you changed my bulb, and those kind of things. I think that's nice, and that kind of works. The fact that this guy is also willing to go to, like, admittedly, whether you've seen this film or not, the television, which is friends with the main characters from the cabin, persuades him to go to the junkyard where they end up. But when they're there, they don't turn around and go, oh, this is just, a junk heap. So yeah, the fact that they go there and they're like, oh yeah, we can legitimately get some stuff for your uni pad here. And the fact he's actually fishing through bins and like finding radios, being like, yeah. But my favorite bit is when he then, is like, oh, this looks like my blanket. Wait, it is my blanket. But seeing the picture on the floor, I'm like, that guy should be freaking the F out at this stage. Like, his reaction is not at all. Like, he should literally be like, what the hell is going on?
I did joke about that when I saw it. I saw that picture. You should have been like, what the hell? Like, what? So somebody ransacked my cabin and like just to dump all my stuff at the junkyard. That's the only explanation.
That's why I didn't choose the other plot summary, because the fact that they say, oh, when the owner doesn't turn up for a year, I'm like, no, this is the cruelty of this film, is like, he's grown up. The fact that they're like, oh, look, he's like graduated and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, it's been years. The air conditioner says that. So again, like you said, Sam, how much can you really love this toaster? And the fact that when he gets there, like, I actually loudly exclaimed, like when he said, like, what's going on here? It's been ransacked. They've, the toaster's gone and everything. And I just loudly went, oh, I don't know. It's almost as if you've left your cabin abandoned.
But it's not, that's the thing. It's not even his main toaster. It's his holiday toaster. It's his vacation toaster. He sees this toaster like, 2-3 months a year during the summer vacation. Same with the Hoover and everything. I agree that the lamp, the blanket feels obvious. The lamp is the only one where they really go out of the way to land that flashback where it's like, this is why he cares about that lamp. This is why the lamp cares about him. What with the Hoover? The Hoover? What possible connection could he have with the Hoover? I can imagine it, but you should show it. Maybe that's why the Hoover's such a dick. The Hoover's the worst.
I also do have to ask as well. It's just, one, what kind of emotional attachment do you have to a physical radio? But two, you're now in a society in which there's like actual better TVs and computers. The hell are you listening to the radio for? Or at least that crappy little radio.
People say similar things about Andy in Toy Story, right? Like, isn't it kind of weird that this kid still is so attached to these toys? Isn't it, like, as almost an adult, as an 18-year-old or whatever? And I feel like, especially in this day and age, that kind of rings more true. Like, I definitely took toys from home to, like, uni. Like, that's fairly normal for a lot of adults now, is to like have old toys or whatever, or have new toys. Like, they make so many toys that are aimed at adults, and it's maybe a little bit nerdy from a certain perspective, but it's fairly normalized. I think that makes more sense than this still, because it's the toys mean something. It's, even if you're not going to play with Woody, it's like, oh, it's Woody from Woody's Roundup, that show that I liked, What's the radio for? What's the toaster for? I mean, the radio could be retro, I guess. Could be like hipster.
Yeah, especially the fact he plays like Tutti Frutti. Maybe again they could have had that. Like, was he dancing along to these kind of like songs, etc. But I think again that's where they could have played more. Like, I remember when I was young, maybe that kind of like, the fact that, oh, let's go to the cabin, maybe reminds me of the fact that like my family owned a caravan, so it was quite similar in the sense of like, oh, let's go down the caravan every weekend, that kind of idea. And yeah, it was like then my grand's caravan, like as my grandparents got older, they were like, oh, we don't go there anymore. So there might have been like a good year or so when they didn't go there. My dad had to go there and clean it up. But I'm still like, this seems like a very long time that this family is like, whatever, either paid rent on a cabin or bought a cabin and decided to just abandon it, and just leave it for years and years. So again, like, how much of an attachment does he have to these devices? And they could have made that a bit bigger part of the story, is the fact that maybe he was more attached to them because they're like the holiday items, if you know what I mean. It's not the kind of mundane what he's seeing every day. It reminds him of having fun with his mum and his dad or something like that, or maybe it's the type of cabin in which there wasn't a TV, so all you could do was kind of like run around and play imagination with other things.
Except there was a TV, and that's the one thing they took from the cabin.
Yeah,
that's true. The old black and white TV, which they still own.
Everything else is modern in that place, apart from the black and white TV for some reason, which sticks out like a sore thumb.
If it was Pixar, it would have been a montage where you see him play with each of the appliances in turn to make it very clear why he cared about them, and it would have had a very sad Randy Newman song over the top, and would all have cried and would still be talking about it today. And it's just as it. I know we've like harped on this for far too long, but like it's fairly central to the movie, and it doesn't really go to any effort to sell it to us. and it's just a tentpole of the thing that just will not
Yeah,
stay
I think
stood.
I have a different way I watch this film. I shouldn't do this. This is bad film reviewing, but I think this is one of the only films that I've accepted to myself that the overall plot through line really doesn't make much sense, and what I actually watch this film for is just an acknowledgement. It's just a series of set pieces that I enjoy.
Yeah, that's fine. That's totally valid. Yeah,
And like, I criticize other people for doing it for other films, but just do it openly for this film, and I'm just like, look, I'm sorry, okay, but I love Worthless. Like, it's one of the only songs from a film I've actively downloaded and listened to on iTunes.
Yeah, I think that's what stands out to me is the songs which like really stand out. You know, some of the sequences, like I said, when I was younger, a lot of like, we'll talk about obviously like the nightmare sequence and things like that. You know, I remember a lot of those visuals and all these crazy antics and sort of sequences that happen. But even just the opening to this really stood out in my mind. Like when I was young, I think when I watched things like animation or things like with puppets or something like that, I wouldn't get freaked out if it was like the clown or like some evil, you know, monster or something. But what I was freaked out by was just like, you know, really quiet scenes in which you were like in really eerie scenarios, like, you know, dead at night. So the opening of this film, when it's like all the like dead trees and it's like this like little like ding ding ding, you know, I'm like, oh, you know, like it's, I used to, I think as a kid, like fast forward past the opening because it just kind of freaked me out. I was just like, I don't like this kind of like tension you're building. And then obviously it like turns sunny and everything's okay. But that always stood out to me. And I think that obviously that kind of like eeriness and darkness carries on. It's something that I had with the snowman as well. Like the scenes in which the kid and the snowman are going around his house when he first like makes the snowman, he comes to life and he puts the teeth, the like dentures in his like mouth. That really terrified me as a child for some reason. So I think it's that kind of, yeah, weird stillness that like stands out to me. So I think similarly to Craig, I'm then watching it being like, oh yeah, okay, what's the other weird bit in this? What's the other strange bit in this? And on watch back, then I'm not focusing on the story as much. But that's what I was going to say to you guys is, what are those standout like crazy moments? And also, you know, we've talked a lot about like the master and everything, but how does this world work? You know, like cars are alive, but then also cookers are alive, but then some fridges are not alive, but some fridges are alive. It's like, I don't know what's going on here.
But also there's this idea that they do need power to do some things, but not just to live.
Yeah.
Like they're all alive all the time, and they've got like basic locomotion abilities. They can like wobble around, but the Hoover can only go at full clip if it's plugged in. Which I don't know if that's... On the one hand, I was asking myself that question before they said, oh, and we're going to use this like portable battery to get there. But then also when they drew attention to it in that way, I was suddenly thinking about it a lot more. Like, but wait, how can they do anything if they're not plugged in? Which, but again, I don't want to get too bogged down in the logistics because there are, as you say, all of these really memorable moments. I mean, it's hard to get away from the clown, isn't it? That's pretty central. The nightmare clown, utterly unnecessary.
I'm a boy.
It comes from absolutely nowhere, but it is extremely cool, extremely memorable, extremely frightening.
I just love how he literally only says one thing, and that one thing is the thing I remember most about this film. Literally just the way, and I've even commented on this before, but just the way he says his line without even moving the teeth, it's literally just run. It's just a little scurrying afterwards, like,
because even the rest of that scene, you think like, okay, well, if you want to make some horror scene for a toaster, what do you do? Oh yeah, you know, burnt toast. You know, like the cloud comes in, grabs the child. You know, makes sense. And even the bath thing, you know, like people again who haven't watched this film, like, what are they talking about? But yeah, there's like this moment in which for some reason the toaster is above a bath and then falls into it, and that's the moment they wake up, is like when they're getting electrocuted, which again is very twisted. And the only thing in my head I could think was like, is it just the creators were like watching things like, you know, Silence of the Lambs and Halloween, and we're like, this is cool, this is rad, let's put all this stuff in here. But apart from all that, the clown just has no context as to why. Like the fact he's in a fireman's outfit, it's just so weird. Apart from the fact that like, that's the only thing I could think. Were they just like, right, the toaster sets on fire and like there's burning, so the firefighter needs to come in. But what's a creepy version of a firefighter? Oh, remember in Dumbo, there was those clowns which were dressed up as firefighters? And let's do that. That's the only connection I could see in my mind, which is just, yeah, it's so screwed up. Why? And the fact that, yeah, the water turns into forks and, like you said, Craig is like waddling away.
Worthless is great. The thing that stuck in my mind as a kid was mostly the chomper. I don't know, the crusher, I guess you would call it. That's the most memorable image from the film for me. Shout out to Van Dyke Parks, who did the songs for this, who's a real legend in like American, sort of like second tier American, like soft rock, West Coast rock. So he co-wrote the legendary Beach Boys album Smile, which is a favourite of mine with Brian Wilson. So really top tier guy, real legend, and did the songs for this. And Worthless is the one where it feels most like a Van Dyke Park song, because obviously Cutting Edge and It's a B movie are very much playing in like genre places. The weird like synthesizer kind of new wave Talking Heads Devo thing on Cutting Edge is really cool. And yeah, It's a B movie has the Peter Lorre lampshade. Anyone can do Peter Lorre. That's why he pops up so often as an impression in movies. It's an impression that literally anybody can do. Well, Phil Hartman does it here to a T. He also does Jack Nicholson as the air conditioner, which is the other thing that stood out to me, which is like a bit like the clown, like doesn't really get mentioned again, or certainly the trauma of what they've just witnessed. They basically bullied this air conditioner into getting so angry that he exploded, and it doesn't really seem to affect them at all psychologically.
And then he, for some reason, has the emotional payoff of the master goes back to the house, sees that he's broken, decides to fix him, and then he's like, oh, he played with me. It's just like...
He's not taking you out the wall, though. He's not taking you to college. You're stuck in the wall.
And that one stood out to me as a kid as well, because I remember, again, it is so intense and so scary for like absolutely no reason in some way. And even in the context of the film, you're like, why did that just happen? Apart from what we said earlier, is this idea of like the world is cruel and like, you know, like what is your purpose in life, and that kind of like, you know, big heavy questions. But what I do respect about this, and I guess that's why, you know, we mentioned we did a commentary on Return to Oz, because I think that's quite similar in terms of like you're watching it and you're like, why is this happening? Why are these crazy things here? But it's still rad, and I appreciate that it's here. You know, it's still crazy, you know, metal-y kind of stuff in some ways. But so that scene to me is just like the bleakness of some of that imagery. And that's why I was kind of like disappointed when he goes back to the cabin and he's like, what happened here? And you see like the air conditioner, and he's just there with like the plates come off, and he like just puts the plate back on. I was like, that thing was on fire. Like, you know, I was like, let's please go back to the scene in which literally he was like sparking and there was like flames coming out of him and he like was crumbling the wall. But the concept I love most of that is just the like, it's my function. I was like, you know, that is like their heavy message there of like, because Toy Story goes into it a bit as well, but they obviously take a few movies to get there, but they're still not very bleak about it. There's a happiness to it. Like Toy Story 4, it's like, yeah, toys get lost. You know, sometimes kids don't care about toys, but they add that spin of like, well, let's try and, you know, entertain the kids that we can get hold of in this park and that kind of thing. But here it's just like, it's my function to just put out cold air, and, you know, like that, I can't do anything about that. And the fact that he just gets like so psychotic about that, and it's just that image once he loses it, and just him in the wall with like the plate come off it, I'm like, it just looks so grim. It just looks so scary.
It's like that and Worthless bookending the film with these images of basically suicide in both cases, in response to the loss of your ability to perform your function in society and the ensuing sense of worthlessness. It feels like a very, and not necessarily that the film endorses this, but that's a very like authoritarian kind of hyper-capitalist perspective, which reminds me, first of all, it reminds me of, I'm going off on two tangents here. First of all, it reminds me of Disney's original idea for Epcot, which was that it would be a functioning city wherein literally everyone who lived there would work in some way towards the betterment of the city, and then once you reach retirement age, you were gone and you couldn't live there anymore. And it also reminds me of a movie that came out, it might have been earlier this year or late last year, called Plan 75, which is a Japanese sort of dystopian future movie where Japan brings in a policy to deal with its aging population whereby you can opt in to assisted suicide when you retire, and that will kind of give benefits to your family down the road if you do that. And it's this quite dystopian idea of you are worth your utility. You are Thomas the Tank Engine, that's another one. In that trinity of stories about utilitarian dystopias, it's like, yeah, if you are not useful, you are as good as dead, and that's what these characters feel, and that's what the heroes are trying to stave off, and that's what the characters in the junk shop have resigned themselves to as well. Like, most of them are quite happy that they're gonna get torn up by this guy. The one really funny joke in the movie for me was, I can't remember the exact line, but it was the lampshade after the very Sid-esque or Al-esque junk dealer, also voiced by Joe Ranft, comes in and dissects and takes apart one of the appliances. The lampshade says something to the effect of like, "You never know what he's going to do. He's so spontaneous." that is funny. This absolutely demented character who's just embraced the chaos of his inevitable torture and death.
Well, that's the song I went to more, like, you know, in adulthood, is the, you know, Worthless. I think that was, once I had rewatched the film, I was like, oh yeah, this is a banger, so I downloaded that. But B-Movie always stood out to me because of how kind of like theatrical and that kind of, you know, the organs and stuff. I just thought it was so fun and crazy, and embracing that idea of the experimentation and all of that. But it also, I think, is a sequence that echoes a lot of these themes. And when you look at the lyrics, they stand out so much. And I think the visuals, you know, really stand out to me in it as well. So the one that always stood out was when, you know, literally they're there singing about, like, you know, how crazy it is and what's going to happen. And then the fact that they're looking there at this like perfect sunset, and they're like, you know, there goes the sun, here comes the night, somebody turn on the lights, somebody tell me that fate has been kind, you can't go out, you are out of your mind. I'm like, that's just so like bleak. And like, you know, the fact that they're saying, you know, there goes our last chance of like positivity and happiness, and like the other characters are there just saying like, nope, you can't go anywhere. And the fact they're saying things like, somebody tell me the fate has been kind, you know, it's this kind of like trying to escape lunacy, trying to escape madness, which I just find is just so, I don't know, poetic and crazy. But like in this film of all things, it's mad. And I love like the tape recorder again. I think if kids watch this now, they'd be like, what's that all about? I think we were brought up in a time in which tapes were still a thing before CDs come in. So the fact that one of the characters is all like reels of tapes, and at the end they're like, oh, and he's there like being lifted with like the scraggly tape arms and stuff. I'm like, there's so many fun designs in it, like the fan and like the weird, I don't know, what do you call it? Like sound recorder, which is like some Hollywood bombshell type thing. She's like, you must be the new boys in town. It's like, there's so many crazy designs going on in this. It's almost as if like like a George Lucas-esque of like, okay, you guys do these characters, you guys do these, you know, see what you come up with. A bit like Toy Story, which they said like Sid's room, wasn't it? It was like, everyone was like, right, create some crazy psycho toys, you know, and everyone got their chance to kind of like experiment and try and make one. This, to me, reminds me a bit of that. But also where you're talking there, Sam, about like messaging, the other bit that stands out to me is, and again, I forgot this until I rewatched it for the commentary and stuff a few years ago.
I don't think you're going to say it, but go on.
Is the flower scene.
Oh, it is the flower scene, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just like, that is just, again, what is going on? This like message of like life and death is like, yeah, I assume it stood out for you as well, Craig.
Needless. It's literally just this flower thinks he's found someone. The toaster runs away, looks back, and he's just there so sad he's dying. It's like, why have you done this? What value does this add to the film?
And I'm like, is this some sort of messaging again about like what you see later on about like the cutting edge of like, you know, the nature versus the mechanical and this kind of stuff, which again, as a kid, I can't remember all this like dancing frog stuff and like all these animals jumping in here, because that is literally as if they've gone into the Disney movie. I'm like, are you trying to parody Disney here? Is this the whole kind of like meeting the little critters thing? I'm like, that has no place in this movie. I don't know why that's there at all, because again, you've already established his cars are alive, electronics are alive, but also animals can talk and animals are like, you know, humanized and that kind of thing.
I think there's a lack of unity in the messaging of each of these individual sequences in the way that you've got in, for example, Pinocchio, which I said that's like probably the Disney movie that this most resembles. It's probably the movie that most resembles Pinocchio up to this point, you know, which is my favourite Disney movie for various reasons. But that's a very clear story about innocence and experience and about resisting temptation. This is about these movies are both about cute, naive characters who are foisted out suddenly into the real world and are faced with a litany of horrors, and then they weather it, they get through to the end, and they get what they want. But in Pinocchio, every obstacle that he encounters is a result of a form of temptation. It's a result of him coming into contact with a force from the adult world that he doesn't understand, which tempts him into one sin or another, whether it's pride or gluttony or having big old scraps in pool halls and stuff like that. And he has to learn to become a real boy, to resist those temptations and to do something for the benefit of somebody else by saving Geppetto from the whale. But in this movie, it's not as clear as that. Like, I guess they all have to be brave at one point or another, but it's not like one version of this movie would be each of the appliances are tested in turn and they prove themselves brave. And you almost get that because there's a bit with the lamp where he saves them when they're losing the power. He kind of conducts the lightning bolt to bring them back power. And then there's two bits where the vacuum cleaner has to put himself on the line, where he saves the blanket from the tree and when he saves all of them in the ravine waterfall thing. And there's just like an imbalance there. So you can either make this movie about each of these characters learns to be brave, but then the blanket doesn't really do anything in that regard, and the radio doesn't really do anything in that regard, and the toaster doesn't really until right at the end. Or there's this story where you take just your one protagonist and have them undergo some kind of arc, which is propelled by all of these things that they encounter. But that doesn't really happen here either, because, like I said, the toaster only really has to demonstrate bravery right at the end. So what is the purpose of these nightmares? What is the purpose of the flower sequence? What does that have to tell us that is compounded by the various obstacles they encounter in the forest? And then what's that got to do with what happens in the junk store? And then what's that got to do with what happens in the apartment and in the junkyard? They are just being subjected to a series of events that don't seem designed to build them as characters in a way like the events in Pinocchio do.
Well, it's also, I think, that idea, like, again, that's why I think it has happened a lot in recent animation, and especially within Disney projects in general. And a lot of people have had problems with that, you know, again, depending on where you are in the world and that kind of thing. But it's that idea of, you know, when sometimes message can overcome story. And I think what, you know, films that succeed in what they do, and again, Pixar can, you know, usually be pretty successful in this, is that idea of, you know, attaching that kind of message to your main protagonist, like you said. So the fact that what they seem to be commenting on is the fact of, like, you know, look how cruel the world is. And I think, like, Cutting Edge, you know, I think that's a really fun song as well. I think you have so many great designs in there of the characters. And there's obviously this commentary on, like, consumerism, a bit like what Craig was saying earlier about, you know, like capitalist society. You have like planes coming in and you have these like signs coming up saying like buy now, only, you know, only available, you know, in store, all this kind of stuff coming up. And I think that, yes, you are talking about, you know, a message about the world and everything, but how does this impact our characters? How is that reflected in them? You know, recently Barbie's done a great job of that by having the fact that everything that happens and everything that you're commenting on that impacts Margot Robbie's Barbie character and Ken in those films. They're not just saying, well, this is the world, this is the message we're trying to say. They're saying how all of this affects that one character, which, yeah, unfortunately doesn't quite come through here. Whereas I think that idea of bravery, that's why I said, is kind of strange in terms of, you know, the toaster especially, because the end of this film, it's almost like the toaster has this moment in which like you have this really bleak imagery of like seeing the red and like, you know, seeing the cogs and the crusher, and you're like, is this the brave moment that they accept that they have to kill themselves? So something I read was basically like somebody who worked on this film, one of the issues they had with it was the Worthless was too grim, because it seemed to be suggesting the fact that the cars were happy to die, so it's suggesting that they're like, you know, suicidal. And it's almost the same with the toaster. It's the fact that like she's there looking at these cogs and she's like, this is my destiny, this was what I was brought to this moment to do. And it almost does seem as if like the toaster is dead, you know, like, and they've like jumped into this and it keeps cutting back to the cogs, and you're like, it's not this kind of like, I can see the point in which I can save the day by hitting that lever or doing something else. It is just like, I need to like literally jump in there and kill, you know, be killed in order to save this person, which is not something you usually see from a main protagonist in that way, unless they're, you know, jumping in and another character's like, no, or, you know, that kind of thing. It's really bleak.
Yeah, it's this compulsion because they are worth nothing without the master. The master must be preserved. Even the use of the word master is weird. I don't love that that's what they call him.
I assume you also found the scene weird at the beginning where the blanket is like floating and like everything becomes like heaven-like and his eyes are all like, the master. That's the bit which I was like, this is weird.
Okay, take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. So, obviously, we don't always have somebody who is heavily researched in the areas of animation with us, so we thought that this would be a good opportunity to ask Sam to talk us through the information they found out about this film. So, Sam, take it away.
Well, my main bit of trivia, because I'll say it depends what your class is trivia, because I've obviously already been through a lot of the production of this movie and how it ties into other movies, but a great representation of that, which very much is trivia, I would say, is that this is the first feature film that has the A113 code in it. Oh. And do we know the A113?
Yeah, the Pixar, like that was the room that they were all in animation film school kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. In CalArts, which was Disney's college, basically, where they trained animators. Yeah, that was the room that they were in, and it's a code A113, which is either said out loud or is visualized in some way in every Pixar film and in loads of other things as well, loads of animated shows, quite a few episodes of The Simpsons, for example. Like anyone who was in this room at CalArts, which is quite a lot of now very famous and influential people, likes to pepper that room number into their film. So it was like a license plate in Toy Story. It's an important code in WALL-E as well. And this is the first movie that has it, and it is on the door of the master's apartment. And that was put there by Brad Bird, who is kind of the founder of the A113 tradition and later went on to direct The Iron Giant and The Incredibles and Ratatouille. And yeah, he had put it in a few TV episodes that he worked on beforehand, but it's the first feature film that has A113 in there. Other than that, I can just hit you with this guy did this voice trivia if we're interested. So yeah, Joe Ranft, who was a writer at Pixar, also did a lot of Pixar voices. He was Heimlich, most prominently, in A Bug's Life. But my favourite voice actor in this, even though it was one of my least favourite characters, is Thurl Ravenscroft, who plays the vacuum cleaner, who has an incredibly badass name, as you mentioned earlier, and is the voice of Tony the Tiger in the original long-running Kellogg's promos, and also sings Grim Grinning Ghosts, which is the theme song for the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, and he sings You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch from The Grinch. So I think that's all I've got that we haven't covered, I'm afraid, but that's good. A113, that's good.
We and like we said, we definitely brought up a lot of, you know, the stuff with John Lasseter at the beginning of the discussion. So again, that was all like facts and, you know, backstory for this film early on as well.
Yeah, the A113, I think every time I watch something, I'm basically just looking out to see if it makes an appearance. So I didn't realise that this is the first one to do it, so that is pretty cool. That probably gives Brave Little Toaster a little bit of a place in film history, despite everything that was explained earlier, that it could have had more, but it was robbed.
And I guess, we mentioned earlier as well, like Phil Hartman, the fact that he's doing like a Jack Nicholson sort of like impression as well. So, there's another kind of like parody like voice that he's doing. And of course, he's famous as well from like The Simpsons, and he had like a very tragic like death as well, which, is like you were saying.
David, why are you bringing that up? Come on, man.
Well,
I'm just
maybe
saying
the brave little toaster is cursed.
Yeah.
Did anybody else die young from this movie? I don't know.
The toaster? I'm joking.
On a lighter note, yeah, Phil Hartman and John Lovitz were both SNL cast members. All of the main characters in this were part of an improv group called the Groundlings, which the director hired basically to come in and do all of this, and they did improv quite a lot of the dialogue. And John Lovitz was hired for SNL during the production of the movie, and his agent wanted to take him off the movie so he could just go and work on SNL full time. So what John Lovitz did was he came in and he did all of the radio's dialogue, which is probably the most lines that any character has in the movie because he's talking constantly. He did it all in one session.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so there's a bit of trivia. There you go.
That makes sense, yeah. Something I saw as well, like in terms of the cast and stuff, is that Dina Oliver apparently in 2010 revealed that her son's deployment ceremony to Afghanistan, some of the soldiers were fans of the film, brought their toasters with them for her to autograph. So we were talking about like who gets attached to a toaster. Apparently people who served in Afghanistan. I was like, wow, that's impressive that they brought toasters to like this scenario to sign.
Yeah, but the problem is I hear that, I just think of Tommy Wiseau and spoons.
True.
Yeah, everyone going to screenings of The Brave Little Toaster throwing toasters at the screen every time the word toaster is said.
So, yeah, we've had some fantastic trivia there. We've talked a lot about trivia and the history throughout this entire discussion. So let's round up our discussion of The Brave Little Toaster now and summarize our thoughts over at the Movie Vault. So for anyone new to the podcast, we like to think of this as a time capsule of memorable movies for someone to dig up in the future. So should The Brave Little Toaster from 1987 gain the honor of a place in our Movie Vault and be remembered for all time? Craig, I'll go to you first.
I knew you were going to come to me first. You're a little prick for that. This film's an odd one because by every metric that we usually decide that a film should go in, I think Sam has given arguments as to why it really, really shouldn't, right? So he's explained that the story doesn't make sense, and he's right. He's explained that the characters are not that memorable, and he's right. He's explained why it could have been it could have been seen as the pinnacle of a certain animation technique, but it wasn't. There are lots of examples of dark media from the 80s. So the question then is, on what grounds could I defend this film going in? And realistically, I think I'm going to have to go back to my one defense, which is just that, to me, I just think that the areas to which this film wants to just go incredibly grim and just incredibly just very, very cruel, I think it at least does it in a very, very striking way. I think a lot of this film we have described as quite memorable, and just the ways in which it depicts a lot of these things, but especially quite graphic. I think the one thing we didn't talk about in Worthless is just the extent to which like cars' body parts are just flying around. If you just think of those as human limbs, it effectively is just, they are being splattered by like cars' versions of blood over and over again. So my feeling is, I think it is fueled from a nostalgia standpoint, but also just, I think, insofar as just the way in which it creates a lot of these set pieces, even though they don't come together in a very cohesive way, I think they are striking set pieces. So my vote will be to yes, but in the event that this eventually turns into a no, I will understand, and I will not be bitter.
Well, I think it's interesting as well because, recently we had discussion in the Full Monty episode in which Darren made the argument based on like, well, the Movie Vault, sometimes, removed films from there in the past. And there is the idea of like, well, this can go in there because there isn't anything representative of it right now. But then again, does that give it the merits that it should go in now, or will there be that chance in the future? Obviously, Darren, I think, made that argument quite well in that episode. But also I think that the Full Monty had the benefit of also being like, you know, an Oscar winning film, etc., and creating quite a big legacy and quite a big cult following. Whereas Brave Little Toaster, I think, does have that elements of like there's so many like visuals and kind of moments in this which are kind of scary and crazy, but nostalgia might also be a big part of that. And again, when I think of like if somebody was to watch this for the first time, would then be that context, and would there just be that kind of like, why is this happening, why is this just like horrific things for an hour and a half, but not in the sense of like, oh, this is rad, this is cool. It's just, you know, goes over their head. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking for a reason to vote yes, because I don't like voting no on anything. I think any movie deserves to be remembered. You know, as an academic, my philosophy is always any movie is valuable because it can tell us about the time and place in which it was made, both in terms of the film industry, and, you know, we've even talked a little bit about, is this reflective of certain attitudes of the 1980s? And it is kind of a footnote in the history of animation rather than actually being a major part of it. But I do quite like this idea that we can put it in there on the basis of, is it representative of an era that there isn't already a representative of? Yeah, I mean, so you have, apart from Shrek and Town Called Panic, are there many animated films in the vault? I'm trying to think.
I did bring up our list to kind of like give context, and again, this is where some things have gone in there based on like when we've talked about studios or like animation as a whole. Like individually, pretty much like the only times we've talked about like animated films is something like The Nightmare Before Christmas, which has gone in, A Town Called Panic. Akira came up after your episode. Your Name came up after that, which also went in. And then we have focused on like Mulan before, when the remake etc. come out, but the animated version went in. So there's a bunch of other DreamWorks stuff went on when we discussed that Source Studio, but again, mainly Shrek and Shrek 2 are the ones which we have sort of actively discussed. And then this Batman Mask of the Phantasm when we're talking about Joker. So, but yeah, in terms of like actual, you know, when we've reviewed a specific animated movie, then it is more from that, you know, Akira, Town Called Panic, Your Name, Shrek 1, 2. Those are the main ones which we've talked, as well as Night Before Christmas, which we've talked about in detail. Yeah, it's a tricky one because then you know that, you know, like in Darren's argument, he was saying, well, you might never get the chance to talk about Train Spotting or something like that, which could be the better replacement for your British kind of like edgy movie. So I guess it's the same thing of like, well, is there a better representation of this dark 80s animation, and will we ever get the chance to talk about it, kind of thing?
Well, there is, but it's Japanese, and it's Akira, which came out the year after, and which, again, deals with, well, certainly this climax of gnarly body horror, which mirrors that of the Brave Little Toaster in a way.
Well, that being in the vault, then, do you think that is, you know, it's already that's doing that role, and, you know, Brave Little Toaster doesn't?
I think that might be my argument. I think I'm going no on the Toaster, because Akira's already in there. That's a crazy sentence, but I think that's where I'm at.
Hey, Sam asked me a question, to be voted down. I answered, okay?
I just think you're a class traitor, David.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. That's why I, you know, give it to you guys first, because again, it was one which I was like, I don't know, because, you know, my opinion is clouded by my nostalgia for it, by having, you know, owned the VHS and a lot of that imagery standing out to me. But again, like Sam, rewatching it, I'm like, you know, there is a lot of like inconsistencies here. There's like the weird things with like, you know, the dancing animals and, you know, the relentlessness of the grimness that happens to them. You know, I think the key points are like worthless B-movie, you know, the air conditioner scene. But then again, you know, like the going into the sludge and into the river and the lightning and everything, you're like, is this all really necessary? You know, what is this doing to the story? So that's where I was more torn on whether I think that it should go in. Yeah, you know, unfortunately, I think I am edging towards no, because I think that it's the same thing as we've discussed before. I think that, you know, in this world in which possibly you could be like, yeah, go watch the clown scene or go watch Worthless, I don't think I can advocate for the entire film. You know, I think that there are some brilliant things and sequences and visuals, and that's, you know, one thing which I also love about the film is, like I mentioned earlier, like the air conditioner, that shot of him after he's blown up, you know, is quite artistic. And like, there's the bit with the repair guy, you know, when they like come out as a ghost, and like that image of him, like it's almost as if the animation levels up like 10 times for a moment when he's screaming, and it's like really detailed and his eyes are popping out. I'm like, that's really impressive. Like, you know, and I think the character animation is really impressive. Is the movement of like Lamp and you know, obviously Toaster's a bit more difficult because it's like, how do you make that kind of like wander around?
David,
but, like,
it's
Radio,
all well and good going into detail about all these things that you like when you're about to reject this film.
It's something that we didn't touch on, but it's something I'd want to add that caveat to say that if, you know, it doesn't go in, I think that there is some impressive stuff here. But what I was going to say is that I don't think it's consistent enough throughout the movie. It's not like Spider-Verse in which you're getting it all the time. It's just, you know, like 4 or 5 shots. And I think a bit like Sam said, which probably led to then those greater moments happening when these people did other animated films in their career. So, you know, yeah, I would say that there's some fantastic moments in here, and the character animation is fun, especially the way Radio points his little antenna around the place. But I think ultimately, as a movie as a whole, we've remembered it here, guys. We've talked about it, but I think it's a no.
Can we at least put in Worthless? Can we just put in the song Worthless? Screw it. I'm gonna change the capital I have.
Just where the movie vault is, like the little track outside playing is Worthless.
I think that's fair. And look, I mean, Akira was obviously really clearly inspired by the Brave Little Toaster in a lot of ways, so its legacy lives on in the vault.
I mean, the irony is, I'm pretty sure on that episode I advocated for Akira not to go in.
This is just madness.
We're in the endgame now.
So now over to our final segment, which might lighten up the mood a bit.
I wish you hadn't said that, because it's Endgame time. This game is called Dark. Seriously? For kids? Yeah, so this film-based game is all about the dark films intended for children. But David wants there to be an element of light shed on this, so this is what the game is going to do. Basically, I have a list of different films which are incredibly dark children's-based films. Specifically, I'm going to read the general summary written by this website. The website in question, I would like to thank at the top of this game, Paste. Specifically, I'm going to reveal them bit by bit, and then when you think you know what the film is, I want you to basically buzz in. The buzz will just be like a word of your choice. And if you get it right, you get points depending on how early you guess the film. In a way that either complicates or makes this game incredibly easy, I'm pretty sure Sam has mentioned most of, if not all of these films during this episode.
I did this last time as well.
Yeah.
I did this with Shrek as well, didn't I?
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah, the beautiful end game that got lost to time. But it's fine. Basically, there's still a possibility that you will remember it quicker than David. So before we get into the game, I just want to quickly check what your buzzers will be. David, what will be your buzzer?
I was tempted to do Run or something like that, but yeah, that might be a bit too much effort. Master.
David chooses saying that a one-syllable word is less.
Well,
it's
more because
effort.
I would want to do the clown. I would want to do the run, you know, so that's just not immediate.
Okay, so David's buzzer is going to be Master. Sam, what will your buzzer be?
My buzzer will be Toast.
Okay, Master and Toast. Sure, whatever floats your boat. But as always, we need to decide what it is that we'll be playing for. But unlike other episodes, because this is one of the special episodes in the run-up to our 100th episode, this will be the prize will basically be a contribution towards the episode that we're planning to be in celebration of our 100th. So we are planning a bonus episode to celebrate our 100th main episode, which is that we're planning another one of our Endgame specials. And the winner of each of the episode Endgames, which contribute to the run-up to the 100th, so these are the special 5 bonus episodes, such as this episode, you will get to choose a factor of your choice that goes into the Endgame special itself. So this might be if you have a game suggestion, if you want us to make games out of a particular film suggestion, or if you have something that you want us to do during the contestants. You don't have to decide this now. You can just let us know before we record that episode, and we will incorporate your choice. So very much this will be a community-built Endgame. But before we get to that, we need to get through the game itself. So just checking. Sam, are you ready?
Toast.
David, are you ready?
Master.
Fantastic. So we'll start with synopsis number 1. You're probably going to want to be quite quick off the mark on this one. Spike Jonze's...
Toast.
Sam.
Where the Wild Things Are.
Shockingly, you're correct. And that, off the mark, is 5 points.
Wow.
That's a coincidence that I mentioned that.
That is a coincidence, but as with many things that seem to involve you, Sam, you just have a wide enough knowledge that coincidences are statistically more likely to happen.
It's true. There's a guy on Letterboxd who makes a list of all the movies that we mention on Disniversity, and it's absolutely insane the amount of stuff that comes up when I'm talking about movies.
And is this also the moment that we talk about the weird coincidence with Ratatouille from last time's Endgame?
Oh, yes! Oh, okay, we're derailing the quiz, but yes, that I invented in the course of that game the fictional movie. I can't remember, what did I call it? I called it something slightly different.
No, I think it was pretty much... I did bring it up earlier because I was like, oh, this might come up.
I invented the concept Ratatouille with a raccoon, basically. And then months later, they somehow, the Daniels, the now Oscar-winning creators of Everything Everywhere All at Once, heard this podcast, stole that idea, and made it a central part of that movie, a central running gag where there's a parallel universe where that's a movie that exists. I think I might have called it Raccacooey and they called it Raccacoony. It was Raccoon-tooey. It was slightly different, but I came up with that idea based on the random prompts that you gave me to come up with an idea for a children's movie, and they stole it and won several Oscars. If one of those Oscars is for screenplay, and I think it might have been, I would like a cut of that.
Yeah, it's just the idea that I think we said, come up with a premise around Swiss Lodge, our like official, unofficial dinosaur mascot. And it was the idea that you were like, this dinosaur wants to be a chef and there's a raccoon in his hat controlling him. It's like, that's such a specific thing.
Yeah.
And for that to come true, wow.
So anyway, now that the trip down memory lane is completed, let's get back to the end game. Are we ready for synopsis number 2?
Yes.
The Disney classic is sweet and enchanting, except for the forest scene.
Toast.
Sam.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs?
You are indeed correct. It is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. As we got to the end of the summary, that is 1 point. Number 3. The witch and woods are frightening, but the flying monkeys...
Toast. The
Sam?
Wizard of Oz.
It is indeed The Wizard of Oz. That's another 3 points.
I was like, what animated film has a witch in it? I was like, wait, this isn't just...
I didn't say animated, did I, David? I said this is films for kids.
I could have got 5 points there, but I didn't have the toast.
Okay, number 4. Dinosaurs battling each other.
Toast.
Master.
Sam?
Is there a penalty for toasting and not getting it right?
No, we'll just carry on until one of you gets it.
Okay, Fantasia.
Oh my god, you got it again.
I was going to say Fantasia, so...
Well, you didn't, David,
I know.
so maybe you should speak up. That's another 5 points. Okay, I'll be impressed if Sam gets 5 points on this one. 2 words. Heffalumps.
Toast.
Sam?
Winnie the Pooh. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
That is not the one they have listed here.
What?
Is it the Heffalump movie? Winnie the Pooh, the Heffalump movie?
That is not what they've got listed either.
Oh. It's toast.
Yep, Sam.
Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day? which is the short in which the first appeared. Yeah,
I will accept that. It is Winnie the Pooh, The Blustery Day.
Ah, very good. Oh, phew.
What is that? Is that what I was thinking of? Is that called the Heffalump movie? That like
Pooh's
No.
Heffalump movie is what
Right,
you're thinking
Pooh's,
of.
okay,
Yeah.
right.
That is a much more modern.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
I was
sort
like,
of
I'd be
in-
surprised if this was like shouldn't be for kids. But
Okay. Are we ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. And David, I'm going to specifically ask you, are you ready? Because we've not heard from you much this game. I'm a bit concerned. Another Rankin Bass production.
Toast, The Last Unicorn.
Yep.
I
last
said no
unicorn.
chance of that. I was like, okay, I had Wizard of Oz, I had Fantasia. I was like, no.
I'm just not even getting the chance to read out half these synopses. So there's probably some people out there just like, what the hell is The Last
To
Unicorn?
be fair, before this,
It's another Rankin Bass production. That's what I need to know.
I did think before this one, I was like, well, Sam has come on and he's said before, I never do well at these things. I infamously don't do well at these things. So I was like, we've both got some, there's going to be a redemption here some way.
Okay. Are we ready for the next one?
Yeah.
This gorgeous German-made film about Bastian's journey through Fantasia.
Oh, Toast.
Yep.
The Never-Ending Story.
It is the never-ending.
Did not know that was German.
No, that's me. There's
That's
like this
another-
era of like
another 3
Last
points.
Unicorn and Never End Story. I'm like, nope, I've never explored that. 90s, maybe.
Okay, we ready?
Yeah.
The Don Bluth directed.
Could be anything.
Master.
David?
Yeah, why not? Secret of Nim.
No.
Oh,
Animation about Russia's.
Toast.
Sam?
Anastasia?
It's Anastasia.
oh.
That could have been like 6 different movies.
Yeah, I, that would have been my last choice if I would just go off
Yeah,
the
me
Don
too,
Bluth
to
thing.
be honest. Yeah.
Okay, next one.
I guess just the source material is like weird, maybe.
Oh, yeah, that is dark, yeah.
No, specifically what they describe is
The dancing bugs in.
the villainous Rasputin who ended up trapped in a dark, skull-filled chamber of limbo, preserved as a living corpse with eyes that would randomly fall out.
Okay.
That's why they thought it's like...
Yeah, pretty grim. And the gremlins, the green gremlin things as well. Yeah, okay.
Cool.
It's no all
I'm
dogs go
going
to
to skip
heaven.
the I'm going to skip the next one because that was Gremlins. I just thought it might be a bit too obvious.
Damn, what I could have known. I could have got that.
It's that 10 points.
Okay, ready for the next one?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Mel Stewart directed Gene Wilder starring.
Oh, Toast. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, you're right.
I knew that name.
David, speak up.
I was
This is good. I'm enjoying
Young
this.
Frankenstein. I was like, wait. No.
I love a quiz.
Okay, we're nearing the end of the quiz. So at this point, I think it's just
Wow.
David, can you get on the board?
Yeah, which often happens in these.
Right, next up. Directed by Jim Henson.
Oh, Master.
Toast.
Master.
That was definitely David.
The Dark Crystal.
No!
Toast is that Labyrinth.
Fucking Labyrinth.
You had a 50-50 shot.
I disagree with that list. I so disagree with that list.
Well, I mean, at the moment, I'm only on 7th of that list.
Well, okay, but if there's a Jim Henson, puppet one, and there's only one, I disagree.
I don't think that's the case. Okay, are we ready for the
Sounds
next
like the
one?
Jim Henson.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Another Don Bluth film.
Master.
David?
Again, I may as well. I'm at this stage. Secret of Nim.
No.
Uh,
A film about death, revenge, heaven and hell.
Toast. All dogs go to heaven.
Yes, all dogs go to heaven. Next up. The film adaptation of Robert C. O'Brien's award-winning book.
Master.
David?
I was going to take a chance that this is Watership Down.
Nope, it is not Watership Down.
Damn it. I was like, I don't know this guy's name, but I know it's
I
obviously.
know who wrote it. I'm not going to mention it in case
Right.
it comes up.
Okay, yeah.
Because unfortunately, the next line also, if you had heard this, but you definitely wouldn't have answered that, because the next part is, was another Don Bluth.
Oh,
It's the story of
Master,
David.
the secret of him.
He's on the board!
Yeah.
He's on the board!
Surely it has to be this by now.
I was trying to
It's
think
the-
what's based on the book, and it is, yeah.
I was like,
It's the
I
story
feel like
of
Mice is
Mrs.
coming up
Brisby.
here. Mice is coming.
And trivia. I'm going to save that loss. In the actual book is called Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, but they changed it to Mrs. Brisby for the movie so that they didn't get sued by Frisbee, the toy company.
Wow.
There we go.
Ah, interesting.
It's not worth any points, but I made a contribution to that
That
one.
should also be our trivia klaxon in the future. Trivia.
Okay. So we're left with 2 now, so let's see how we do. Next up. Aside from being one of the darkest children's movies of all time, the Frank Oz...
Master.
Toast.
David? That is definitely David.
Yeah, it was.
Frank Oz. Yeah, Dark Crystal.
He's done it again. It is Dark Crystal.
Yeah.
So there, David, you were moaning about it not being on the list. It's higher ranked than Labyrinth.
Okay, I'm happy.
Oh,
then.
this is ranked.
Yeah,
this
I
is
didn't know
getting
Yeah,
that.
so
darker as we go.
I've literally been reading out random extracts, but basically going down the list. So
Okay.
basically, we're closer to the darkest.
So this is Pace Magazine's #1 darkest children's movie.
The one that I'm about to be describing now.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Are
That
we
helps.
ready for our final question?
Pressure's on. Yeah.
You say that you've lost, David.
Well, I
so-
mean, in terms of like, what is the top one?
Okay. This is the most terrifying movie I watched as a child.
Toast. It's surely Watership Down.
You would be correct.
Yeah.
It is.
But then Pinocchio
Another-
is still out there. It hasn't been mentioned.
And yet Pinocchio was not on the list at all.
Yeah, darker than so. Snow White was on there. Pinocchio's worse than Snow White.
Yeah,
definitely.
so just to tell everyone, because obviously I skipped out a few entries, here is the entire list. 20, Where the Wild Things Are. 19, Alice in Wonderland. 18, Snow White. 17, The Wizard of Oz. 16, Return to Oz. 15,
when
Fantasia.
I said Frank Oz, I was like, this isn't Return to Oz, is it?
that would
Yep.
be good.
14, The Hobbit. 13, Winnie the Pooh, The Blustery Day. 12, The Last Unicorn. 10, The Neverending Story. No, sorry, 11, The Neverending Story. 10, Anastasia. 9, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. 8, Gremlins. 7, Labyrinth. 6, All Dogs Go to Heaven. 5, Coraline. 4, The Secret of Nim. 3, The Brave Little Toaster.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so high up in someone's heart. 2, The Dark Crystal. And 1, Watership Down.
Of course.
So thank you very much to Paste for that list. But in the end, I'm sure we're all dying to know the final scores, and by that, how badly David lost this. So David, your final score was 7.
a respectable score in any other game, I'll point out.
Yep. And losing to 45.
Wow.
The winner is...
Is that like one of the highest scores ever? Because usually it is just a 1-point system.
Yes.
Wow.
That is probably the
There you go,
highest
Sam.
score on
You are
record.
redeemed for all your previous losses. Well done.
So how
well
do you
done.
feel?
I feel pretty good. I love a quiz, man. I love a quiz. That's a great quiz. That worked. I disagree with some of the contents of the list, but I'm happy with that as a format.
I'm glad that I at least got Dark Crystal, and I'm glad that I didn't take a Winnie the Pooh win away from you, Sam, because I know how much that film means to you as well. So
Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, man. That's what threw me. But actually, respect to Paste for separating that out from the rest of the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, because it is the only one that's really scary.
true.
But the missed out Dumbo. Was Dumbo on the list?
No, Dumbo was not on the list.
If you've got Heffalumps and Woozles, you need Pink Elephants on Parade because it was first and it's scarier. And the rest of Dumbo is way worse than the rest of Winnie the Pooh. I'm not gonna. No, stop. I'm done.
Oh yeah, I think I would describe Dumbo as like traumatic.
Yeah, it's like Pinocchio, Fox and the Hound. There could be so many in there, kind of, you know. So.
Black Cauldron wasn't on there. Black Cauldron's easily the darkest Disney movie.
Is there any thoughts, Sam, early ideas of what you would maybe suggest?
Not at all. I'm going to spend some time on it. It will be animation related. Or maybe it won't. Sometimes I do come up with quiz rounds in my head, and I don't usually write them down because I don't host a quiz. But I might see if I can dredge one up. Yeah, I will get to you on that, yeah.
Awesome. Right, well, yeah, it feels weird to not be like, right, our next film, and me like researching where you can watch it and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been fantastic talking about The Brave Little Toaster. Obviously, if you do want to check out that film and you've just listened to our thoughts about it, as we've already established, you can only find it on bootleg DVDs or weird versions of it. It is on YouTube.
It is on YouTube, let's be fair.
Oh, right, okay,
Disney
fair
doesn't
enough.
want, if they don't want us to watch it on Disney Plus, then, I can't.
Is it on
judge
YouTube and its original aspect ratio? Because I need to get on that, if so.
Yeah, you like watch it and then you're like, this should have gone in the movie vault. Now I can see what's on the right and left of this film. It's opened up a new world. But yeah, thank you for joining us, Sam. Obviously, you, as you mentioned earlier, have had lots going on, and you just had a massive era you've just gone through on Disniversity in terms of going through some of the biggest Disney films of all time. So please do catch us up on what have you guys been up to, what have you got coming up, and yeah, what would you like to shout out? What socials, which could be extinct in 2 weeks' time, are you on?
Yeah, that is true. We have just done what is known as the Disney Renaissance era. So we break our show up into kind of loose seasons based on different eras of Disney animation. And we've just done the Renaissance, which is effectively the 1990s. It's Little Mermaid through to Fantasia 2000, which includes, it's Little Mermaid, Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, Fantasia 2000. So for people of our generation, those are the Disney movies we grew up on. Those are the ones you've probably got the fondest memories for, and they're generally some of the best movies that they've ever put out. It's an amazing run of sustained quality. So if you have not listened to Disniversity, now is a good chance, because there's a likelihood we've covered your favourite Disney movie. If we haven't covered your favourite Disney movie by now, I'm very intrigued as to what your favourite Disney movie is. So we are about to launch into our next season, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, which we're calling the Wilderness Years, which kicks off with Dinosaur into The Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, Lilo and Stitch, maybe that's someone's favourite, Treasure Planet, and others, Chicken Little, eventually. Good Lord.
Oh, my favourite. I'm joking. I am joking.
Oh, very good. So if you are looking for an episode to start on, you're probably going to find it in that most recent run. So do check out Disniversity if you haven't already. And to tie in chronologically with looking at Disney's entry into the 21st century, we've also recently announced a live show at the London Podcast Festival at King's Place on Saturday 9th of September, where we are covering, as I have already done on this podcast to an extent, the movie Shrek. So it's not a Disney movie, but it is part of the Disney story in several key ways. Its producers had come from Disney, and it would have a huge impact on the movies that Disney would produce over the next 10 years. So it's a big part of the Disney story, and we're really looking forward to talking about it. We'll have a great time, and of course Shrek is my academic specialist subject, really. So if you want to see me talk about that live with Ben Travis, King's Place, Saturday 9th of September, it's on kingsplace.co.uk. Hopefully I can see some of you guys there. Yes, that's pretty much it. So Disniversity, as always, spelled Disni Versity, not Ney as in Disney. And we are Disniversity Podcast on Twitter, and I am Sam Summers, and then the number 0 on Twitter, Sam Summers 0. Sorry, pardon me, X.
Yeah.
Rolls eyes into the back of heads.
I actually was almost sick the other day when I typed in www.x.com and it took me to Twitter, and I was like, oh, it actually is the URL. And to be clear, I wasn't going on any dodgy website or something when I was searching that.
It's not porn. www.x.com. And that's really particularly unhelpful for me, because there is a female porn star called Sam Summers.
Oh, wow. Okay, so
if I'm saying search for Sam Summers on x.com, that's that's very different from searching for Sam Summers on xvideos.com, for example.
I was just searching it up because I was like, just visually, www.x. I was like, that just looks horrible. You can't really do that. And I typed in, I was like, no, yeah, it goes to Twitter. That's bizarre. So yeah, definitely go check out Disniversity. When you were mentioning films there, Sam, Hunchback was also another one. I was like, that could be on that list as well, considering the dark things that are going on in that movie.
True.
And I'd very much recommend people go check out the podcast, if nothing else than for your reaction to the Pete journey that you and Ben have been going on recently, who's the Disney character with Mickey, etc. That was very fun when I heard that recently. So,
Mickey Mouse's nemesis Pete, who Ben initially had no idea who he was, and he just gradually keeps popping up in random places as you go through, to the point where, well, I'll not spoil where it goes, but yeah, our interactions with Pete are always a good laugh.
Yeah.
He doesn't pop up in Shrek, unlike a lot of other Disney characters, so I don't know if he'll make an appearance at the live show, but he might.
Well, I respected the attention to Goofy movie, because I also, class that as, in the days of me picking up VHSs like Brave Little Toaster. I remember, Goofy movie I had some great memories about, which also has a great soundtrack like this film. So that was a fun bonus episode you guys did. So yeah, go check out Disniversity. Thank you again, Sam, for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to your recommendation for our Endgame special, which will be celebrating 100 episodes. And obviously this is, in the build up to that, so we're glad that we finally got to discuss this movie. Unfortunately, it didn't make it into the movie vault, but we made lots of memories and talked about its legacy. Nonetheless, is now the best time to ask Craig anything to add?
Run.
Well, that's a bit terrifying. Right, thank you everyone. Have a good time. Go check out Brave Little Toaster if you can on YouTube, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.
You've happily discarded because it doesn't match the up-to-date technology that you're using. You're part of the problem. You're actually a disgusting human being.
I'm the cutting edge song, basically. I would be in that song.